our conversation, and we are happy to distribute this after to the group for anyone that's interested. All right. So for those of you that may not be familiar, Social Finance is a national impact investing nonprofit and registered investment advisor. Impact investing is a big part of our work. And what motivates our impact investing team every day is aligning more of the $1.5 trillion in charitable assets in the US with mission. And so we seek to meet foundations and families and other impact investors wherever they are on their impact investing journey and provide solutions to move more capital to impact. Our work generally falls in three buckets. The first is our Social Finance Impact First Fund, which is designed to get capital moving quickly for impact in a low cost and easy way by providing this diversified portfolio of impact investments across asset classes and across impact areas. We also have our impact investing advisory services, where we'll work with a foundation or other institution on customized approaches to impact investing aligned with the foundation strategy. These are very often place-based, and we work with foundations across the country, ranging from Boston to Colorado to Washington. And we'll share more in a moment on what these partnerships often look like. And then lastly, we have our field building work, providing access to education, data, tools, and networks, conversations like today's to make impact investing easier for the field. And we do this in partnership with our newly launched Social Finance Institute. So just double clicking a little bit on our advisory partnerships with community foundations and other institutions, we often see this work unfolding across several phases, and we work with foundations and investors across these phases. First is often around education and feasibility. We can support engaging key stakeholders like your board or donors around your impact investing goals, defining what those are from both an impact and financial perspective, clarifying the impact and business case, and making sure that there is line of sight to seed funding for a portfolio. We also work through the portfolio design phase with our partners, building out processes and policies, codifying everything from your investment thesis and criteria to staffing strategy and business model. And then finally, we can also support on the implementation and management of programs, everything from due diligence to portfolio management and ongoing monitoring and reporting. The focus of today's conversation is going to be on impact first investing. And this sits within a broader spectrum of impact investing that I'm sure you all are familiar with. On one end, we have traditional investments. And Natalie, if you could maybe just flip to the next slide, that'd be great. And on the other hand, we have traditional philanthropy. The focus of the programs that you'll hear about today and Social Finance's work is on this middle bucket of impact first investing, which we define as investments that are made with a primary purpose of achieving impact. Financial returns are expected, but very much secondary. Okay, it looks like we're maybe frozen on slides, but we'll chug along here. Before I introduce our panelists, wanted to just say a few words on what our team has observed often as the why for implementing place-based carve-outs based on our conversations with many foundations that have implemented these across the country. Number one, we know is that the impact case is primary. Grant capital is not sufficient to address a lot of the very intractable challenges that our communities are facing. And so now more than ever, we need to think more holistically about assets within our philanthropic strategies and institutions and how to deploy those into the community. And we also know that there is a robust pipeline of opportunities to support deployment of that capital through private funds, CDFIs, and even among nonprofit grantees of foundations. And Natalie, if you're able to flip to the next slide, that would be great. And then we also know that even outside of the impact case, there is a clear business case, particularly for those of us joining today that are representing community foundations and other DAF sponsors in the audience. Our national DAF donor survey that Social Finance conducted a couple of years back found that over 70% of donors were interested in making impact investments through their DAF. And we know that demand is highest among the incoming next-gen donors, but this interest spans ages, account sizes, and geographies. And for community foundations in particular, we see that impact investing is often a really compelling way for them to differentiate themselves and sell their unique local value proposition, especially alongside larger national DAFs with lower fees. So with that, I am really thrilled to turn it over to our three incredible panelists who are going to share a little bit more about the why of their program and how they went about implementing it. We have today joining us Rebecca Price, who is the Senior Director of Donor Alignment and Impact Investing at the Boston Foundation. Mary Kay Rutherford, President and CEO of the Montana Community Foundation, and Shanaysha Sauls, who is the CEO at the Baltimore Community Foundation. So really thrilled to turn it over to this group. And maybe I will start with you, Rebecca, since you're first on the screen here. I would love if you could share a little bit more about TBF's journey in impact investing and how you've gone about implementing your carve-out.
Thanks so much, Kathleen, and thank you, Social Finance, for having us on the call today. And great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces too. And looking forward to telling you about our program at TBF and hearing your questions a bit later. So just to set the context, the Boston Foundation is about $2 billion in assets. Roughly a little bit more than half of that is comprised of donor advised funds. So a little bit over $1 billion is donor advised funds. We have about $500 million in our own discretionary endowment that we manage as well. And, you know, our journey to impact investing has been going on for quite some time. So prior to what we kind of just have created, we've been doing quite a bit. So our first kind of foray into impact investing was in 2005. We established a $15 million pool of capital that came out of our own endowment, so not using donor capital at all. And had a focus to align investments with our mission and look for often a concessionary return. When we carved this out, it was roughly about 5% of our assets at that point. Now it's under 1% of our invested assets. And we continue to recycle that 15 million and deploy it for impact and then receive it back. In 2018, we developed the Business Equity Fund, which is a philanthropically funded impact investment fund that provides alternative financing and access to capital for qualified Black and Latinx-owned businesses, which generally are constrained by conventional financing practices in the Boston area. So the BEF was primarily funded with grant capital from donors, although donors also had an option to make a loan through a community development financial institution that also supported those businesses. That capital has been deployed and returned and redeployed as well. A lot are still outstanding. About a year later, in 2019, we established our impact pool, which is a market rate pool. It was established with about 10 million of the Boston Foundation's discretionary funds and then about 70 million in donor capital. That pool has now grown to over 150 million, and we continue to see it grow. And as donors are interested, they can invest in that pool. So instead of investing in kind of our traditional pool, they can invest in this impact pool. We also, for quite some time, have been facilitating bespoke investments for donors. So a donor can come to us and say that they want to make a loan or an equity investment or a recoverable grant, and we will work with them to facilitate that transaction. Um, to date, we've done roughly about 15 of these transactions on behalf of donors. We really ask in that case for donors to assume the burden of diligence, and acknowledge significant risk in making these investments. Um, our, because that was what we offered to donors for quite some time, our board came to us and said, we are hearing more about this impact investing work. We know we are doing it, but how do we enable more of our DAF holders to be a part of impact investing? And so in 2022, upon the request of the board of directors, we developed an impact investing offering for all donor advised funds that really removed the burden of diligence from the individual donor. So about a year and a half ago, we deployed roughly $6 million of donor capital into 8 organizations that were grouped into 4 different portfolios. And we did this using the recoverable grant structure. And so in 6 years, donors have the ability to then get that capital back, should all of these organizations be in a strong financial position. So using the recoverable grant structure enabled some flexibility there. All of this, all of what we were doing and our, kind of our foray into engaging more donor advised capital brought us to where we are now, which is over the last 2 years, we worked closely with a subgroup of our board and our senior leadership to develop an opportunity to engage all donor advised funds at the Boston Foundation that are invested in any of our long-term offerings. So the impact pool or our balance plus pool, which is our long-term pool. And we're really thrilled about this opportunity. We have found kind of through all of these experiences that I've just shared, various different learnings that brought us to this point. And we, we saw through our pilot that going donor to donor to donor was a very time-consuming process. So we had 30 DAFs engage in our pilot, and that required significant time from our donor services team and others to bring that $6 million in from those 30 DAFs. So our program that we're going to be rolling out in July will be an opt-out structure. So all DAFs will be able to participate in this unless they decide that it is not for them. We will take on the burden of diligence, finding, sourcing, vetting opportunities, and we are mostly looking at indirect opportunities, so CDFIs and funds. And then we will also take on the burden of reporting back to donors. We feel that this is super important, and our board felt this is super important because it really can help accelerate our mission, strengthen our brand as a really innovative community foundation and civic leader, and help us build on our existing impact investing initiatives to respond to the continued demand for impact investing among donors, and also help us retain donors and donor advised funds. With so many different opportunities out there, this we felt would give us a competitive edge as well. And lastly, and most importantly, it allows us to strengthen our impact in Boston. So not only are we deploying grant dollars and helping our donors to deploy grant dollars, but we're using a portion of capital that would just almost be sitting there and just invested, but now we're deploying it into the community and having impact in that way. So I think I'm at time, but I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and excited to dig in a little bit more on the process and structure of your program when we get to our discussion. Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you next to share a little bit more about Montana Community Foundation's journey in impact investing and how you've gone about implementing your carve-out.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks, Social Finance, for hosting this. It's always so good to learn from our peers. Rebecca, we could not be more different than the work that you're doing. We're very new to this. So our board went through a pretty extensive process just examining the whole concept. And it took us a long time to get here, I will say. Just a little bit of background about Montana. We are a statewide community foundation. We serve the entire state of Montana. And nearly all of our assets, or the vast majority of our assets, are permanently endowed, including our donor advised funds, for a variety of reasons. One large contributor to that is there's some state laws that incentivize endowed giving from a tax credit perspective. We have a great tax credit that encourages people to make planned gifts to permanent endowments. We're 37 years old as an organization. We have approximately $200 million in total assets. So again, a lot smaller than Boston, and a lot younger in this work in serving our community. We went through a pretty deliberative process of examining what impact investing looked like and what it might look like in Montana. And we decided to take a really simple approach to get started. And we really want to have great success and not make it more complicated than it needs to be for us and what our capacity is in terms of administering. And so our board authorized us to commit up to 5% of all investable assets in this impact investing world. And so there's no option for donor advised funds to opt in or opt out. One of the things that we felt is, as a state-based community foundation and a state-focused community foundation, most of our assets come from the people of Montana, and we're sitting on a mountain of capital, almost all of which is permanently restricted by the donor as to the purpose, whether it benefits a specific charity or serves their own donor advised fund. And so we don't have a lot of discretion on grant making. We have very little unrestricted money. But what we can affect is where we make our investments. So our board made that decision to approve up to 5% of our investable assets. Went through a pretty thorough process of developing policies and framing how we would define impact. And it was important to us as we're thinking about our focus areas and our investment principles, that our objective first and foremost is impact. And we defined impact in areas that actually align with our strategic plan and our strategic focus. And so we'll be investing in things that align with serving communities that are struggling with disinvestment, including rural places, tribal communities, regions experiencing population loss, and some of our most critical issues here in Montana, which are not completely foreign to what you all are experiencing, but definitely seniors, Native Americans, youth, women, housing, security and financial security, food security, income constrained populations. And so we've just made our first loans, and it was a huge deal for us. I want to shout out to Casey Tollefson, who's our Executive Vice President of Finance and Administration. She's on our call today. We made two $1 million loans to intermediaries, both of which are focused on addressing our housing crisis here in Montana. So we're going really slowly. The loans that we made are to entities that we have strong partnerships with already. One is a native CDFI and the other is a housing organization. They're trusted partners, and we have approached this process as one where we are learning along the way. We shared with our applicants early on that we will be seeking their feedback in the process and how this is working, as much as making them a financial loan to advance their missions. So, that's kind of us in a nutshell in our process. Just to give you a little bit of context, roughly 28% of our investable assets are donor advised funds. Just to give you some perspective, we also have funds that specifically benefit our local community foundation affiliates, and we have funds that are designated to specific nonprofit organizations. And so that's a little bit about Montana and our journey and where we are. We're really at the early stages. So happy to go on mute, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Mary, and congratulations on closing your first loans. That's a huge milestone, and excited to continue to follow your progress there. Shanaysha, why don't I turn it over to you to close us out, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about Baltimore Community Foundation's program.
Absolutely. Again, thank you for the time. Social finance, we always enjoy being with our community foundation and place-based peers to learn from one another. So thanks for the virtual opportunity. I will share along the note that Mary shared as well, that we consider ourselves still learning. We've been doing impact investing, I guess now 7 years. It's been since we launched our first deal. But we're probably like teenagers in the field, so we're confident, resilient, but still full of lots of stupid ideas. But by no means have we mastered the field at all, and we're still learning and growing and making plenty of mistakes. As a community foundation, we are 53 years old here in Baltimore, and we are currently about $315 million in assets. Roughly half of our assets are donor advised funds. And of the 315 million, we are about 175 million endowed. So those are kind of important as we kind of lay out our strategy and our approach. So I mentioned that we've been doing impact investing for 7 years, but the conversation for us actually started back in 2016 when the Mission Investors Exchange Conference took place in Baltimore, and members of our board and staff attended. And that was really like the light bulb moment. There was kind of this realization that, grants truly can only go so far. And there was a hugely undeveloped tool in the toolkit that we could be using. So as we learned about this intriguing new world of impact investing, there was this thought that we should give it a try. And I should say in 2016, although I was at the MIE conference, I was there in a different capacity. So I wasn't actually the head of BCF at the time. But there was a lot of excitement by members of our board and members of our staff to kind of figure out if we could try this on. So the first thing that had to be done is we had to kind of convince the board that this was a good idea. And again, generally speaking, the rule of thumb is that you protect the corpus, right? You protect the corpus, grow it over time so that you can be a permanent endowment for needs as they evolve. It's a very good tried and true first principle. And no one should take that for granted. So kind of making this leap of faith, making that case was going to be very important. So although it now seems like a no-brainer thing to do, there was a lot of, fear and trembling about, could we do this and could we convince our board to do it? And again, this is 2017. I actually started it in 2018. So what the team decided to do was to develop a group of focus groups of fund holders and those experienced in investing and impact investing to kind of understand not only the options for impact investing, but also to kind of help us understand the appetite for moving something like this forward. And that was a really, really diligent process that took place over several months. And I think there was this recognition that ultimately that this was something that BCF should try, as I think Mary and Rebecca both said, that we had these assets kind of sitting on the sidelines. Could we do something more and different with them? So in late 2017, I think around the time that I was actually hired, the board authorized the ability, but not the requirements, that the investment committee could use up to 4% of our endowments to do impact investing. So fast forward the turn of the year, there was someone came to me and said, do you think we should do impact investing? And frankly, I didn't even know what I was saying. And I said, of course we should do it. Let's keep this ball moving. And so what we decided to do was that we would move forward with our first foray. We again could use up to 4%. And at that time, our assets were only $170 million. So we were about $172 million when I first started. So we're only talking about $5 million that we would carve out. And because we were risk averse, rightfully so, again, protect the corpus, grow it over the long term to be able to do permanent good over time. We focus on our fixed income class. So that 4% that was pulled out from our fixed income class. So we weren't doing any equity investments. We're still not doing any equity investments. We also wanted to try to think about like, what were the principles? And now I'm kind of in the seat. What were the principles and values that would drive our decision-making? And so we talked a lot about mission and alignment, and that we would kind of call our program Invest for More. Which I've actually asked my lawyer if I can patent. They laugh at me every time I say it, but the whole idea was to play on this word of investing, impact investing, and Baltimore. So that's why we call our program the Invest for More pool. I will say in the first few years, we barely left the front porch. And I say that proudly. There's nothing wrong with that. We also treated impact investing a little bit more like a side gig or a pet project, something like this cool thing that we're doing over there, because what we needed to do was we needed to prove the concept. So our first investments were incredibly safe. They were good, they were solid, but they were safe. We used intermediaries. All of them were CDFIs, but they were, more importantly, experienced, proven partners who had been in the space for decades. And frankly, while we wanted them to have some local projects in their deal, there was no requirement that all of the projects in the fund had to be local. We just wanted to be able to say there's some Baltimore in there. And the returns were almost guaranteed. They did a lot of good work. Most of those deals were in housing, affordable housing, some education projects and the like. But we were able to prove that this thing was real. And then after the first few years, particularly as we were grappling with COVID and the Community Foundation's response to COVID, we agreed that we wanted to come off of the front porch and that we wanted to have more direct local deals, and that we're going to increase our appetite for risk. So what that meant for us is that we were kind of looking for people who were like hyper local, focused on Baltimore, primary, secondary. Even if they did some other things elsewhere, we wanted our funds only to be used in the Baltimore market, which for us would be the Baltimore region. So we moved from, again, really safe, great partnerships with national and regional CDFIs to working on launching the first microloan program for immigrants and refugees who have an excellent experience of default rates. Like, their default rate is closer to zero. It's Americans that default on their loans, but because they didn't have the banking history, they weren't able to build up credit. So we were able to help to launch that here in Baltimore for immigrants and refugees resettled here in Baltimore. We provided working capital fund for local women-owned and minority-owned vendors to open stalls in a historic and iconic food market we call Lexington Market. And we also want to provide social business loans for entrepreneurs that were growing or seeding their businesses here in Baltimore. I know that we're going to have Q&A, so I'll just kind of end with kind of the three options that we offer. So we offer many doors, but they're not infinite doors to participate. So the first one I talked about was the carve-out from our endowment. We started at 4%. During COVID, we increased it to 5%. And as of last year, we actually have the ability to go up to 8% if we want of our endowment. So the first door is that any endowed fund is automatically participating in Invest for More because of the carve-out. The second is that we have a special fund called the Baltimore Impact Pool, or the Invest for More Fund, which is what I call it, where donors can make direct contributions to the Invest for More pool, and we couple that with whatever we are investing in the endowment. And then the third option is the donor advised fund itself, where we give people either the ability to invest a portion of their fund as an investment option. So you might say, I have a $500,000 fund and I want 30% in the money market. I want 30% in Invest for More, and I want the remainder in the BCF investment pool. So we allow people to kind of lock up their donor advised fund. Or if you really like a deal that we're doing, and you can only participate if we've done the due diligence, you can actually designate a special donor advised fund for that particular loan. And you lock it up, and then the returns go into that DAF, and then you can decide at the end of it if you want to continue to invest or you want to use it for grant making. I'll just close on this one note. So again, I started with, we started with a 4% carve out. We're talking about $5 million max to experiment with. Today, it's become a core part of our toolkit. It's not this side project over here. And we have more than $13 million total in the impact pool. We have deployed just $10 million of it, and we continue to grow through the various options that I shared. So thank you for the opportunity. Again, we're still a teenager. Confident, full of stupid ideas, and delighted to be here.
Love it. Thank you so much, Shanaysha, and really appreciate all of the perspectives from both Mary and Rebecca as well. I think the context of kind of how each of your foundations is structured is super helpful in thinking about how that informs the shape of your local portfolio, and affirms this idea of if you've met one community foundation, you've met one community foundation. So appreciate you all sharing. Maybe to open up our conversation here, would love if you could each share a little bit more, and Shanaysha, you've touched on this a little bit already, on how you all went about engaging your boards in this process, and in particular, managing some of the concerns that may have come up. And I can imagine one of those, particularly for investment committee members, may have been, what is the impact of this on the overall portfolio returns? So how you went about addressing those concerns, and what that process looked like.
Reverse order, perhaps? Is that okay? All right. So for us, yeah, our investment committee was leery. I mean, we were afraid of negative returns. So what we did is we set a benchmark for the impact carve out. So we started with something that was completely nutty. It made sense at the time. It was completely nutty. It was like the 1-year treasury note plus 1.5%. But we ultimately landed on a benchmark in the last couple of years of 3%. Again, it's from our fixed income class. So just to give you some perspective, that also gave us some flexibility, because we have deals that we're charging 6 and 7% interest. They tend to be the safer ones. And then we have deals that are a little bit more high risk, maybe a little bit more help in terms of capacity building, that we're able to charge a lower rate. But as long as the impact pool overall is 3%, we feel like we've done a good job.
So in Montana, I would say our process of getting the board there was probably the most difficult part of the entire process for us. We first learned just about the whole concept of impact investing probably 11 years before we actually got to do it. We presented it. We had an outside group come in and present to the board, and there were a lot of reasons why the board didn't want to do it. They said, well, let's wait till we get to 100 million in assets. And once we get to 100 million, then we'll talk about it. It really took it really took the right people, getting the right board, getting the right people on the board who are interested in the concept. And our board chair created a special working committee, an ad hoc committee, to explore impact investing and report back to the full board with a recommendation. And during that time, we participated in a cohort of other community foundations that were looking at impact investing. So giving our board and our investment committee really the reassurance that this has been existing for a really long time. We're not the first people to even entertain the idea of doing it. We can take it in small pieces, and we can dip our toes into the water and go slowly and hopefully not make any crazy mistakes. But I think the one thing that really got our board to say, yeah, why wouldn't we do this, is just looking at our own investment performance and looking at all of our asset classes. And some of our asset classes, we had a lot of risk in those areas, and we had unrealized losses one quarter, and they're like, wait, we're saying, no, we don't want to do this because there's a potential we might have a loss, when in reality, we're already doing this. We're just not doing it in Montana. And so it was this whole mind shift of, we're encountering risk by investing through Wall Street. Why don't we look at Main Street? Why don't we look at our state? And our part of our requirement is all of the deals that we're doing are Montana deals. And so, we can say to our communities and to our donors that you know, kind of gives us, we believe, a competitive advantage. You know, when you establish your funds at the Montana Community Foundation, a portion of those assets are reinvested in Montana. So it's very compelling. It's a really compelling case for folks. So that's how we got there. It wasn't easy. We actually had one of our ad hoc committee members who absolutely did not like the idea of us in making these kinds of investments, and told us so, and said they were going to vote against it. And they ended up leaving the board over the decision. I believe it was over the decision. They said it was something else, but you know, time commitments, blah, blah, blah. But I believe we lost somebody because of this decision. And I still, to my core, believe this was the right decision for us. So that's us.
I think for us, luck played a little bit of a role here. Our now board chair is an enthusiastic supporter of impact investing. And we got the mandate from our board to push this further and figure out how to bring more impact investing into the work that we were doing at the foundation. So we had some champions, and I think that's also really important. And then we created some champions too. So we pulled together a small committee like Mary did. And on that committee sat our board chair, our chair of investment committee, chair of the development committee, and then some other really influential folks on our board, Tracy Palangen, of social finance, who sits on our board. So we had this like kind of small group of champions who were really enthusiastic about this and helped us really shape what we eventually brought to the board for a full vote. We also made sure that the folks that sat on this small little committee also sat on these other committees. So I mentioned investment and program and whatnot. So by the time we went to those individual committees, we knew we had champions in those places too. So walking into those meetings, we had support. And by having so many people part of our co-creation process, we were hearing the concerns and mitigating them all along the way. So when there was a concern about how this would reduce grant making, we had an answer. When there was a concern about governance, we had an answer because we had used this smaller group of board members to test a lot of things. And I think that was really, really helpful. We, what we're launching in July is a 5% allocation, and we did a lot of modeling to demonstrate how this is basically a rounding error. And that got a lot of people very comfortable too. And helped us kind of move things forward.
It's great. Yeah, really appreciate, I think, you know, threads from all of you on the importance of bringing together this smaller group that can represent cross-functional perspectives across a board. And Mary, really appreciated the point that you made around reframing risk and acknowledging that there is risk in any investment, and this is just reallocating some of that locally. Maybe would love to hear from each of you about how you engaged your donors, which are another really important group of stakeholders as you all represent community foundations and DAF sponsors. What did that process look like of educating and engaging your donors about what it might mean to have a portion of their fund invested locally? Whoever wants to jump in first, feel free.
So as I mentioned before, when we did this pilot, we engaged our donors a lot. And to seek investment or to actually get the investment from the donors during this pilot, it took 1 to 3 meetings. So we were spending a lot of time talking to donors, and we have 750 donor advised funds at the foundation. We obviously couldn't go to all of them. And we recognized that that was a really time-consuming process. But through that process, we developed 30 champions, 30 donor advised funds that are now really enthusiastic about what the foundation is going to do next. We had an event just 2 weeks ago to report back on kind of all of the investments at the foundation, and that room was heavily populated by the folks that had participated in the pilot. So we have these champions. Again, it's like seeding these champions, right? And so now, as we're engaging in the education process for our larger donor base, our 750 donor advised funds, over the next few months before we roll out this program, we will leverage the enthusiasm of the smaller group of donors. We have a whole kind of campaign set up with letters and outreach and webinars. But honestly, at the end of the day, since we're developing a kind of default with an opt-out option, we want our donors to just feel comfortable and do nothing. So we are structuring that in a way to convey that we've kind of done this work, giving donors lots of opportunities to ask questions if they have them, and access to their relationship managers. But at the end of the day, we are expecting to have kind of low engagement, which is always the opposite of what we want generally from our donors. But in this instance, that's what we're going for.
So we kind of took an interesting approach with this because every single person on our board is a donor, and they represent a variety of types of donors, whether they're donor advised fund holders, whether they're annual planned givers, whether they themselves have foundations that are engaged in impact investing. So we really considered our board and our special ad hoc committee and our investment committee to be the donor group that we were testing this idea with. We didn't do any additional outreach as we were considering moving into this world. Primarily, some of the rationale might be we don't consult with our donors when we're making other investment decisions. We look at our responsibility for investments as a responsibility that the Community Foundation holds. And we definitely, once we were confident along the way that we were going to move in this direction, we started kind of feeding the line softly in community gatherings, talking about the concept, and had nothing but extremely positive feedback on the idea and the concept. And again, because we took 5% of all investable assets, that was our policy decision to make this very simple for us to administer. And now that we've made our loans, we're regularly communicating that through our regular communication channels. So that's how we engaged our donors, is going through the process with this investment committee, special ad hoc committee, and our board.
Great. I think your experiences, Mary and Rebecca, reflect what we hear a lot of times from community foundations that have implemented similar programs. Is there's a lot of concern and angst about how donors might react to this, but once they hear about it and get a sense of the investments themselves and really understand them, it's received with a lot of excitement and sort of course, like this is exactly what we should be doing type of sentiment. Maybe one more question from me, and then I'm starting to see some questions come into the chat, which is great. So everyone start to think about what questions you might want to pose for our panel here. I'll ask one more and then we'll open it up. Would love to maybe hear from each of you about how you all thought about program sustainability or sort of the business case around your program. I think that's another common question or concern that we hear is what is this going to cost us, and how are we thinking about sustainability over the long term? So would love any reflections that each of you could share.
So I guess I'll start. I mean, I think for us, it was really important to make it one of the tools in the toolkit, right? To kind of move it from side projects to one other way that we show mission alignment. And to Mary's point, we're regularly communicating about impact investing, just like we talk about our discretionary grants, a new bequest, a fund holders giving. So it's just a part of our identity and our DNA. I think in terms of sustainability, I think capacity is always the big question. So what we decided to do is that we've kind of homegrown our impact investors internally. So I've never hired someone who was an impact investor. We invest in the resources available to us, organizations like Social Finance, Mission Investors Exchange, to teach a cross-functional team that straddles donor services, community investment, and finance to be our internal work group so that we're always building a bench of people who can bring fresh ideas. So we have a kind of built-in capacity. They're almost like a team. And I just think kind of showing regularly the financial returns as well as the social impact that we give year over year. So again, we don't treat it as a special thing anymore. It's a part of our DNA. It's what we do. And it's really about the future of impact investing. That's something that we tried and abandoned.
It's a good thing I grew up as a middle child because I'm very used to being second in all things. So, similarly, we look at this as, because we are taking a really simple approach at how to do this, there are, long term on the horizon, we have these great ideas of how we might increase that 5% by participating entities, whether they're donor advised fund holders or designated funds or what have you. But for now, we're starting very simple. We also have a team approach. Our communications department and our donor services impact areas are all involved in the work that we're doing along this line. And so we started this out in a way that would be core to what we do. And by doing that, I think it's going to ensure the long-term sustainability of making this just part of our regular work.
One quick thing to add to what Shanaysha and Mary shared, we charge a fee, and that fee is just a little bit higher than the fee that we charge on other assets. And we feel that we can offset that in various ways. So something to consider as you're building out your programs.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to start with some of these questions that are coming in the chat. We have a question about liquidity, which I think is directed to you, Shanaysha, and David did provide an answer for in the chat, but just want to see if you'd like to add anything here. Casey asks about how you manage expectations around liquidity with DAF holders. And David mentioned it sounds like there's a cap of 75%, but any other commentary that you want to add, Shanaysha, on kind of how and why that cap was set?
Yeah, David's on the impact investing work group, so he's the expert on the call. David is absolutely right. We wanted to build that cap just to set the expectations about liquidity and the timeline. So there's also a lockup. I think we typically ask for a 7-year lockup so that they know what their grant making can look like over a specific time horizon.
I'll just add from our perspective with liquidity, all of our invested assets have some kind of liquidity constraints in the way that they're invested. So we invest in hedge funds and private equity that has a longer term lockup. And so when we were thinking about liquidity, we kind of took those same principles to how we would structure this impact first fund. So the way we have it structured now is that if we allow donors to close their account anytime, right? And if it's an especially large account, there might be some kind of holdbacks. And so we wanted to make sure we could still do that with this impact first fund. So the way we look at this is that if you want to close your fund, we'll help you do that. If you grant out the full balance of your fund every year, you wouldn't be a part of this pool. You'd be in our short-term pool and not kind of part of this impact first pool. And then if you wanted to be a part of it, it would need to be a special election, like an opt-in. In that sense, if you're kind of in the short-term pool. The other thing that we looked at is that when folks draw down kind of on their granting, draw down for grants, they would draw first from kind of the most liquid assets. So our, their short-term assets, whatever's invested in the short-term pool, whatever's invested in the long-term pool, and then this impact first would be kind of that last 5%. So that also kind of addresses some of the liquidity issues and kind of how we look at them.
We have a question from Patrick here. around confirming that some donors are able to give directly to the impact investing fund. I think this may be directed to you, Shanaysha. How do you communicate with these donors, and what is the case that you make to them?
Well, it's just another way to give back to Baltimore. So our mantra is invest in Baltimore. So they're able to make a direct contribution. They're stewarded through our development and donor services team. They receive special updates about what their contribution is doing. And they consider it, I mean, it's essentially treated like almost like a grant, except for the grant is not to an organization, it's to our impact pool. They also, by the way, don't expect the return on that money, I should also say. So if you keep it in your donor advised fund, the returns go back to your donor advised fund. When you make a contribution to the pool, you're essentially saying, we love what you do so much. You're so smart, do whatever you want, go make a good deal, and those returns go back to the pool to pay it forward. So.
Did that then allow you to, sorry for jumping ahead, but did that allow you then to like lower the cost of capital? Or like what, when they make a grant to the pool, like what does that enable you to do? Or how do you see that?
Does it enable? I don't know that we've taken the opportunity to lower the cost of capital, or maybe we just haven't thought about that opportunity. For us, it just gives us more capital to devote to deals. That's kind of the way we've typically thought about it. I don't know if that answers your question.
We have a question here from Charlie around impact reporting. How do you track impact outcomes, and what do you share with donors and other stakeholders?
So
Well,
sorry.
no.
No, so I'm sorry. We used to do a traditional investment briefing where we'd like show all the numbers. So we changed it to an investment and impact briefing. So we do like a whole carve out specifically on the financial and social returns for all of our impact deals. We also highlight a specific deal every year through a video. Now we've changed the briefing to a state of BCF, but we essentially we do a report on the numbers. So it's just a part of like our impact report that we show overall. Sorry for interrupting you, Mary.
Oh, no, that's okay. We just had this discussion last week with our investment committee chair or impact investment committee chair. And one of the things that our application asks folks is, you know, besides the financial return, what sort of, how do you see these funds making a social impact in the work that you're doing? And we'll ask them to report back to us annually in terms of how's that going in terms of the social impact that you'd hoped to see. We really want to fine tune that reporting and then how we share those stories moving forward, because we think that there's a huge opportunity there for us above and beyond, you know, just the financial return. So getting the stories back from the folks that we make the loans to, and then telling those stories.
And then maybe follow up real quick. For that one, do you have like like populated metric for them to follow, or there would be anything like if it's an affordable housing, do you have like number of units or anything like that, just whatever they care about?
In our case, we ask them to define that when they're applying for the loan. We ask them to talk about, you know, the LS population that will be served, how many, you know, residences, how many, whatever they're attempting to do, how they're going to measure the impact of those things. And so every single deal, I think, will have a different reporting mechanism based on what they set out to do. But
I think, Mary, that is a spot on answer. We do the same. And I will say that one of the things that it's easy to get caught up on is the social impact. So reporting financial returns is actually pretty straightforward. It's the social return part that, you know, there's actually no playbook for it, which is great. Because when there's no playbook, you can kind of, well, I'm sure social finance has a playbook, but I think there's a lot of options and alternatives for articulating social impact. So don't let that be an obstacle, because I know that we kind of did a lot of hand wringing, and I think Mary's approach is the right one.
one of the things that we learned in the process is one of our 2 loans that we made was to a Native American CDFI for housing, and this is housing on tribal trust land. And the amount of hoops that our Indigenous communities have to go through to even get to that point is just unbelievable. Most of us could not even comprehend applying for something. And so just having that, having them had already gone through that process is definitely sets them apart from others. So we're trying to also be respectful to those that we're wanting to make these loans to.
Absolutely. I think, it's something that we continue to come back to again and again, is just the importance of making sure you're striking the right balance of sharing out stories and data with donors and stakeholders, but also not trying to be overly burdensome to the organizations and communities that we're trying to have impact in. We unfortunately aren't going to be able to get to all of these questions in the chat today, but really appreciate the engagement. There's lots of great ones in here. Maybe I'll just pull out one more, which I think is directed to you, Rebecca, around staffing, how you are thinking about staffing your strategy. And then we will certainly follow up with anyone else that has questions and do our best to answer or make sure we direct questions appropriately to our panelists.
I will sort of answer the question and answer kind of another point that was raised, which is we when we were creating our program and trying to figure out all of these questions, staffing, resources, opt-in, opt-out, allocations, we had some amazing support and resources. So one, we worked with social finance. In full disclosure, they were awesome. We loved the team that we worked with. And we connected with our peers in the field. So I had several calls with a Baltimore Community Foundation, San Francisco Community Foundation, New Hampshire Community Foundation, Chicago Community Trust, just folks that kind of were doing similar things or different things or a step of ahead of us in different ways, so that when we shaped our program, we had all of that support. And so I would encourage the conversation beyond this. So, we benefited greatly from that support, and I would think others on the call could benefit greatly. And so I would encourage you to reach out and ask questions too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca. And just want to reiterate, there are so many incredible resources out there. Someone mentioned in the chat the Community Foundation LinkedIn group, which is an excellent resource. We also have a number of folks from MIE, another great resource in their Community Foundation group. And we're always available to answer questions or connect as well. My colleague just put our emails in the chat for myself and my colleague Mike as well. Really appreciate you all joining us here today. Hope this is the first of many conversations like this. We will send around the recording for anyone that's interested, and please don't hesitate to get back in touch. Thank you so much, and a special thanks to our panelists as well. Have a great rest of your day.